Imagine for a moment stepping into the shoes of those who came before us. Welcome to a journey that transforms history into vibrant stories that captivate and inspire. You're standing on the edge of a creaking wooden dock in 1274 somewhere near the Korean peninsula. It smells like brine, fish, guts, wet wood, and just a hint of dread. The Mongol fleet is preparing to set sail for Japan, hundreds of hulking ships bobbing on restless waters, their hulls stuffed with soldiers, horses, rations, and doubt. You step aboard with a curious mix of confidence and confusion. You are, after all, part of the greatest land army the world has ever seen, and yet here you are going to sea. What could go wrong? Well, you probably won't survive this. The decks pitch and sway under your feet. Soldiers grip the railings with white knuckles. Horses whinny and stomp uneasily in the holds. The salty spray bites your face, and above the clamor, the orders barked in Mongolian Chinese and Korean clash like cymbals in a poorly rehearsed orchestra. This invasion is no small affair. It's Kublai Khan's imperial message sent via ship, pay tribute, or perish. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to post your location and local time. I always love seeing where in the world you're drifting off from. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're part of the 1274 Mongol invasion of Japan, the first of its kind. This is not a naval expedition by experienced seafarers. Most of the army Mongols, Chinese, conscripts, Koreans have never seen a proper ocean, let alone crossed one with the promise of war. The ships are cobbled together in a rush. Scholars estimate the fleet consisted of some 600 to 900 vessels, many little more than repurposed riverboats with sails slapped on like band-aids. You know that feeling when you assemble IKEA furniture without the manual and just hope for the best. This entire invasion feels a bit like that. Still, it's not just chaos. The Mongols are fierce, unified, and unusually diverse for a medieval force. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, rules over the Yuan dynasty in China and has decided Japan must submit either diplomatically or by force. When the Japanese politely ignore his letters multiple times, he chooses the latter. The target, Kyushu, southern Japan, the beach, Hakata Bay. You're told the Japanese will fold quickly, that they are backward, provincial, and militarily unsophisticated, but the first clash on land will soon disprove that. You land in Hakata with the rest of the forces wading through shallow surf while arrows whistle overhead. The Japanese defenders aren't waiting politely to be conquered. They're fierce, fast, and seemingly immune to fear. They shout strange war cries. Some even challenge you to individual combat, which is deeply confusing. Because that's not how you do battle at all. You fight in units with coordinated volleys, explosive bombs, and massed cavalry charges. But here on the beaches, it's just mayhem. Swords, rain screams, and the occasional horse slipping on wet rocks like a cartoon banana peel. One quirky detail sticks with you: the Mongols use early forms of gunpowder. Small explosive shells hurled with catapults called tetsuhao. They explode with a flash and boom, terrifying the Japanese who have never seen or heard anything like them. Some run. Others become even more furious, charging straight through fire and smoke like very angry samurai fireworks. Historians still argue whether the Mongols had any real plan beyond show up and overwhelm. The truth is, command and coordination break down quickly. The Japanese know their terrain. They fight tooth and nail, and worse, weather turns on you. You're back aboard ship exhausted and confused when the storm hits. It's not a gentle drizzle. It's a god-tier typhoon that seems to rise from the sea itself in divine anger. The boats, already rickety, begin to snap apart. Sails rip, masts crack, Horses scream in their stalls. Men pray vomit and cling to the sides of the ships like frightened barnacles. You try to bail water with a helmet. It doesn't help. Some ships sink before your eyes. Others drift helplessly, slamming into rocks or each other. You glimpse men swimming for shore armor, dragging them down like anchors. Others simply vanish beneath the waves. In the morning, those who survive stumble onto shore, shivering, wounded, humiliated. The retreat is unceremonious. No farewell speeches, no strategic withdrawal. Just a slow, soggy embarrassment as the survivors hobble back toward Korea. For the Japanese, it's a miracle. They believe the gods have intervened. The typhoon is called kamikaze divine wind, and that term will echo through their history long after these broken ships are forgotten. For now, though, you limp back to the remains of a fleet. You cough up seawater, curse the weather, and wonder if Kublai Khan will try again. Spoiler, he will. And next time it'll be even worse. You trudge back into the muddy, windswept port at Masan in Korea, stomach empty, dignity more so. The return voyage from Japan in 1274 has been nothing short of catastrophic. Half the fleet wrecked, thousands of men drowned or lost horses gone, supplies depleted, and not a single inch of Japan held. You squint into the chill of late autumn, wondering how this all started in the first place. How did a people of endless steppes and open skies, horsemen who feared no army on land, end up trying to conquer an island they could barely reach? Let's rewind a bit. You're not just any Mongol warrior. You are the product of one of the greatest military expansions in history. The Mongol Empire, born under the ruthless brilliance of Genghis Khan, had already thundered across Asia, steamrolling through cities with terrifying speed and brutal efficiency. The Mongols had taken China, Persia, the Khwarezmian Empire, parts of Russia, and dipped their hooves into Eastern Europe. They were masters of the land nomads who carried warfare in their bones and strategy in their saddlebags. But the sea, not so much. You're the descendant of cavalry archers who could hit a squirrel at full gallop. Boats. You barely know which end floats, but Kublai Khan. Your leader, the great Khan Emperor of the Yuan dynasty in China, has a vision that stretches beyond mountains and deserts. He believes the seas should bow to him too. After conquering the Song dynasty and consolidating power in China, he turns his gaze eastward to the islands of Wa, what the Chinese called Japan. And why well tribute prestige and principle? The Mongol world order demanded submission, and the Japanese court had the audacity to ignore Kublai's polite suggestion: surrender now or face the consequences. You can imagine how well that went over in a court where everything from sitting positions to incense scents followed ancient ritual. Who is this horse lord, the Japanese wondered, to demand anything of us? So how does an empire that dominates land learn to dominate the sea poorly and hastily, it turns out? To invade Japan, Kublai needs ships and lots of them. Korea, already subjugated by the Mongols, is asked to contribute, which is a nice way of saying build or be burned. The Korean Goryeo court scrambles to construct hundreds of ships, in record time felling forests and press-ganging shipbuilders. The result is a fleet of wildly mixed quality, some vessels seaworthy, some deeply questionable. You get assigned to one that smells like mold and hope. You cling to the railing as it sways like a drunk ox on a frozen pond. Here's a French tidbit: the Mongols didn't just load up warriors. They brought siege engines. Yes, catapults on boats. Someone had the bright idea that you might need a trebuchet at sea. It's unclear if these were actually used or just served as elaborate ballast, but the image of men trying to fire a catapult from a rocking deck is comedy in motion. Another oddity: horses. The Mongols refused to leave home without them. Herds of steppe ponies were brought aboard. Ever seen a horse seasick? It's not a pleasant sight. The logistics of feeding and managing live animals on cramped wooden ships for days on open ocean. Let's just say the smell was memorable. And not in a good way. Historians still argue whether the Mongols genuinely understood naval strategy, or if they simply hoped brute force would translate across water. In fairness, some Chinese conscripts were experienced sailors and Korean shipbuilders weren't entirely clueless. But the unity that defined the Mongol horde on land did not quite survive the leap to sea. Multiple languages, uneven command structures, unfamiliar conditions, it all added up to chaos. Still, this first invasion had some early tactical successes. The Mongols introduced gunpowder weapons, coordinated attacks, and psychological warfare. Unlike the samurai who preferred individual duels and small unit skirmishes, the Mongols overwhelmed with noise smoke and precision. Japanese accounts describe the confusion men disoriented by exploding bombs, stunned by relentless arrow volleys, shocked by an enemy that refused to pause for anything resembling chivalry. Yet it wasn't enough. The invasion faltered not just because of Japanese resistance or divine winds, but because it was premature, rushed, improvised. You get the sense now, back on dry land, that Kublai Khan underestimated the sheer difficulty of launching a transoceanic invasion in the 13th century, and yet he isn't done. While you recover in Korea, rumors spread. Kublai is furious but undeterred. He's already planning a second invasion, one that will make the first look like a test run. You shake your head wondering if you'll survive the next one. But for now, you try to warm your hands over a brazier and scrape barnacles off your boots. Back in Japan, meanwhile, things are changing. The court that once responded to Mongol demands with poetry now responds with defensive walls. Literally. They start building a stone wall around Hakata Bay, over a mile long and 6 feet high, designed to prevent landings like the one you just took part in. They reinforce their coastal defenses and shift their military strategy. No more open field confrontations. Next time the samurai will fight on their terms. But you still have a long way to go. The sea is quiet for now, but not for long. And Kublai Khan is still watching the waves, dreaming of an empire that reaches just one island farther. You don't see Kublai Khan in person, very few do, but you hear about him constantly. His name hangs in the wind like incense in a temple, heavy, lingering, and ever-present. Kublai, the Grand Khan ruler of the Yuan dynasty, master of China, and grandson of Genghis himself. He doesn't just rule an empire, he embodies its momentum, its ambition, its belief that no frontier is final. At this point in the story, you're probably dry, no longer covered in brine or horse drool, but still scarred by the memory of the 1274 invasion. Yet Kublai isn't giving up. No, he's doubling down. Why? Because in his mind, Japan isn't just an island, it's an insult, and he doesn't take insults lightly. You see, tribute in Mongol diplomacy isn't optional. It's the glue that holds together an empire stitched from dozens of cultures and customs. You can keep your religion, your local leaders, even your seasonal festivals, just so long as you acknowledge Mongol supremacy and send offerings to the Khan. A few golden bowls, some exotic animals, a formal letter that basically says, "We know your boss." Not a bad deal, really. Most took it. But Japan doesn't play along. Back in the 1260s, Kublai first sent envoys to the Japanese court bearing a friendly letter. You know, the kind that says, "We hope you'll accept peaceful relations," but also sort of implies submit or else. It's the diplomatic equivalent of offering tea with one hand and holding a flaming torch in the other. The Japanese court, under the rule of the shogunate in Kamakura, didn't really know how to respond. There was internal debate, certainly. Some courtiers whispered, Maybe we should respond just to buy time. Others shrugged. Ignore them. What can a horseman across the sea possibly do? Spoiler, quite a bit as it turns out. In the end, Japan responded by not responding at all. Several times. Which is to a Mongol roughly equivalent to spitting in their milk. When Kublai sent his next batch of envoys in 1268 and again in 1271, he received no tribute, no letters, not even a mildly worded postcard. Kublai, of course, took this as a personal challenge. Here he was the great Khan building roads, canals, palaces, and an administrative structure across China, and a tiny island dared ignore him. That simply would not do. Here's where it gets weird. The Japanese did eventually kill one of the Mongol envoys. Not by accident, not in a drunken brawl, but on purpose, after a few more polite threats from the Yuan side. It was a bold move, though not exactly a diplomatic one. Imagine refusing to RSVP to a royal wedding and then punching the courier who brought the invitation. Historians still argue whether the Japanese understood the full weight of what they were doing. Was this a calculated defiance or a cultural misunderstanding? After all, Japanese political power was fragmented, ruled by a shogunate, guided by Bushido ethics influenced by Buddhist monks and aging emperors. Perhaps they didn't grasp just how seriously Kublai took silence. Either way, the gauntlet was thrown, and so the first invasion in 1274 was born, rushed rough but driven by pride as much as strategy. When that failed, Kublai didn't retreat into introspection. He began preparing for the next attempt before the seawater had even dried from the broken hulls of the first. More ships, better plans, larger armies. A storm might have stopped him once, but surely not twice. And you're caught in the gears of this imperial machinery. Maybe you're a Mongol horseman who would rather be galloping across dry grasslands. Maybe you're a Korean shipwright who's had to turn your rice barn into a dry dock. Or a Chinese conscript told to pack a spear and a week's rice cakes and head for the unknown. No matter your role, you're a tiny part of a very big grudge. One curious fact: Kublai Khan never stepped foot on Japanese soil. He never saw the waves he sent so many to cross, nor the cliffs they died beneath. He ruled from Beijing, sending orders via silk scroll and horse relay surrounded by scholars, astronomers, and concubines. He may have dreamed of Japan, but he pursued it like a chess piece he couldn't quite capture. That doesn't make him less dangerous, just more removed. The kind of removed that can afford to throw thousands of lives at a problem over and over without blinking. Even the Mongol court, as mighty as it was, began to murmur. The costs of the campaign were massive. Treasury coffers strained. Diplomats questioned the value. Advisors suggested focusing on internal matters, but Kublai would not be denied. Japan was unfinished business, and so he began plotting the second invasion. The one you'd rather not be part of, but probably will be, because the summons is coming again. The fleet will be larger, the stakes higher, and the divine wind, well, who's to say it'll blow again? You look out at the ocean and wonder, not just whether you'll survive, but whether you'll ever understand what makes a ruler chase a storm across the sea. You're standing in the audience hall of the Japanese imperial court, not literally, of course, because you wouldn't be allowed anywhere near the chrysanthemum throne unless you were nobility or part of the shogunate's retinue. But for now, let's imagine you're a silent observer in the corner. Incense curls through the rafters. Silk rustles. Courtiers murmur, faces carefully arranged into masks of elegance and detachment. A letter has arrived from Kublai Khan. The atmosphere is polite, restrained, and also absolutely brimming with unspoken, "What now?" The letter itself is as much warning as invitation: submit to the Yuan dynasty, send tribute to the Khan, or face consequences. but it's worded with the peculiar formality of Mongol diplomacy, a mix of polite phrases that carry all the menace of a blade concealed in brocade. You expect some grand response, maybe a delegation, maybe even a subtle attempt at negotiation. Instead, the Japanese court sort of doesn't reply. You could call it passive resistance, or you could call it the world's most elegant ghosting. The imperial court in Kyoto, caught in the ceremonial rhythms of aristocracy, defers to the Kamakura shogunate. The shogunate, meanwhile, decides to not answer at all. They figure silence sends the message better than any words could. This diplomatic stonewalling isn't entirely out of character. Japan, after all, has long cultivated the art of doing nothing very deliberately. But this time, the silence echoes far beyond the sea. And when more letters come and more envoys, Japan eventually decides to make things absolutely undeniably clear. They execute the Mongol emissaries. Yikes. Historians still argue whether this was an official state act or the independent move of overzealous samurai. Either way, the signal is unmistakable. We're not interested in becoming a vassal state. Please stop sending us letters or people. To Kublai Khan, this is heresy by omission and execution. He's furious. He believed his offer was generous, submit, become part of the greatest empire in the world. Enjoy trade protection, maybe a few fancy titles. Japan's refusal, and especially the killing of his messengers, isn't just disrespect. It's an existential challenge to his vision of universal rule. Back in Japan, though, there's no sense of panic. At least not at the surface. The court still performs poetry contests. Buddhist monks debate philosophy. Aristocrats compose waka verses about the moonlight on pine needles. But behind the scenes, things are shifting. The Kamakura shogunate knows the storm is coming. Quite literally. They begin preparing for war, and yet the contrast is striking. While the Mongols build ships by the thousands, Japan builds walls. You've probably never seen so much attention given to stone and shoreline before. At Hakata Bay, where the first Mongol fleet landed, the Japanese begin constructing a long defensive wall about 2 meters high and stretching for miles along the coast. The logic is simple. The Mongols might have greater numbers, better siege tech, even bombs, but if you keep them from landing, you might not have to fight them at all. You, as a wandering observer of history, find yourself watching samurai and laborers side by side hauling stones and shaping defenses. This isn't the romantic image of feudal Japan, no serene gardens or moonlit duels. This is anxious labor sweat in the sand, preparing for an enemy who already brought thunder once. One quirky note during this time, Japan doesn't have a centralized national army in the modern sense. Samurai fight for local lords, and loyalty is personal, not professional. There's no salary, no pension, no guaranteed rewards. They defend Japan partly for honor, partly for land, and partly because no one wants to be the one who let the Mongols through. Another oddity, no one really knows what's happening overseas. Unlike the Yuan court, which has information network supply lines and official scribes, Japan's intelligence is sparse. They know something is being planned, maybe a fleet, maybe a second invasion. But there's no TikTok to scroll through for updates, no anxious generals checking satellite maps. Just rumors and storm clouds. Despite the preparations continue, watchtowers go up, archers train more frequently, priests offer prayers, and somewhere in a Kyoto monastery, a monk quietly writes about a dream of wind gods protecting the nation. You can almost hear the first whispers of kamikaze, though the term hasn't been coined yet. Meanwhile, Kublai is still drafting angry letters, and Japanese scribes are still politely ignoring them. It's a bit like receiving passive-aggressive Christmas cards from a distant relative only the gifts are flaming arrows and tax demands. Historians still debate whether the Japanese knew how close they came to annihilation. Had the first invasion succeeded, had the storm not intervened, Japan might have been a tributary state by now. Its politics reshaped, its cultural traditions interrupted. Instead, the quiet resistance of poetry and patience holds firm. For now, but deep down the shogunate understands something the court in Kyoto does not. That next time the Mongols will come back in force. Bigger, bolder, and even more determined. You look at the half-finished walls of Hakata and wonder, will they be enough? The answer lies not in stone or steel, but in the wind. You hear the hammers long before you see the ships. The air in Korea is thick with the sound of construction. Wooden mallets striking hulls, saws rasping through pine voices, calling out in Korean, Mongolian, and Chinese. It's the year of the pig 1280, and Kublai Khan has ordered something monstrous into existence. A second invasion fleet, bigger, deadlier, and louder than anything the world has seen. You're standing on the docks near the port of Goryeo watching as timbers are dragged in from stripped forests, bent into ribs and nailed into the bellies of ships, not built to last but built to carry war. The second invasion of Japan won't make the same mistakes as the first, Kublai insists. No more underestimating the weather. No more half-hearted landings. No more improvisation. This time it'll be overwhelming force. And while you admire the ambition, it's hard to ignore the smell of desperation underneath. This new fleet, historians estimate it may have numbered over 4,000 ships and 140,000 men split between two forces. One from Korea, the other from China. It's a staggering logistical undertaking, a medieval D-Day but with bamboo nails and rice rations. And here's the kicker. A lot of the shipbuilders involved don't actually want to be building ships. Korea, already under Mongol rule for decades, has no say in the matter. The Goryeo court is exhausted but obedient. Its artisans, carpenters, and peasants are drafted into the effort. Some cut corners, others sabotage from within. There are even quiet stories of nails not hammered in all the way, of seams left unsealed. Tiny acts of resistance you'll only notice when your ship begins to leak in the open sea. And what about the vessels themselves? Here comes the quirky bit. Many of the ships, especially those in the Southern Fleet, are flat-bottomed riverboats. They're great for calm inland waters, not so great for open ocean swells. They don't slice through waves so much as slap them like a beached fish. When the storm comes, and it always comes, they'll bob like dinner plates in a sink. Historians still argue whether Kublai truly understood the dangers of relying on such ships, or whether his advisors were too afraid to tell him. After all, no one wants to be the person who says, maybe we shouldn't invade Japan again, sire, to the most powerful man in Asia. You walk along the rows of ships feeling the slap of sawdust against your boots. Horses are loaded once again, tied awkwardly in the holds, their hooves scraping the planks. Armor is stacked in crates. Bows and spears are sealed in waxed linen. Drums sit ready to beat the call to war. There's a sense of momentum here, but also tension, like everyone knows they're building something cursed. And what about the troops? They're a patchwork of the Empire, Mongol cavalry, Chinese infantry, Korean auxiliaries, Uyghur archers, even some Southeast Asian sailors pressed into service. It's the greatest multi-ethnic medieval army to ever board a fleet, and they speak in tongues even their own officers can't always understand. Each soldier carries not only his weapon, but also his doubts. Many remember 1274, the typhoon, the chaos, the samurai who fought like fire, fast and fearless. But this time Kublai has no room for hesitation. The Southern Fleet under Chinese command will rendezvous with the Korean fleet at Iki Island, Then both will push toward Hakata. You, like many, are still skeptical. You've heard whispers of divine winds of kami spirits who guard Japan with storms. You don't believe in spirits, usually, but you also don't like the way the clouds look lately. One fringe detail stands out. Some shipbuilders carve tiny protective inscriptions into the ribs of their ships. Buddhist phrases charms desperate prayers. Not officially sanctioned, of course, but no one stops them. Even the most practical sailor will sometimes leave an offering at sea. And speaking of offerings, the Mongols aren't just bringing weapons. They're bringing gifts. Silk, wine, gold, all to be distributed once Japan is conquered and its people properly subdued. There are already maps drawn for new Yuan provinces. Kublai has written the script of conquest before the first sail even rises. Still, you can't help but notice how rushed it all feels. The Chinese fleet is delayed. Supplies are miscounted. Weather isn't cooperating. Some ships rot at anchor, but deadlines must be met. The Khan's word is absolute. And so the second invasion fleet limps forward half-finished in places, wholly overconfident in others. You board again. The smell of salt water hits your nose. You find your place beside crates of arrows and bundles of salted fish. You look at the sky. It's clear for now, but you've sailed these waters before, and somewhere in your bones you remember how it felt the last time. You can almost hear the collective gasp when the Mongols return to Japanese shores, not with a whisper, but with thunder. It's summer 1281 and the second invasion has officially begun. But this time it's not the same war. The Japanese are waiting, and they are not interested in playing by the old rules. You crouch in the shallows near Hakata Bay again, just like in 1274, only now the landscape has changed. Not the trees or the rocky beaches, but the preparations. The wall you saw being built. It's finished now. Stout stone 2 meters high stretching for miles. Enough to prevent cavalry from charging ashore. Enough to keep attackers stuck in the surf like stranded crabs. And the samurai. They're different too. Gone are the open field charges and chivalric invitations to single combat. Now they work in teams, they coordinate. They've learned painfully that the Mongols don't wait for introductions. You see them on horseback behind the wall, longbows at the ready armor, glinting like beetle shells in the sun. They're faster, sharper, quieter. They don't scream now, they strike. And this time, it's not just the Japanese who have changed. You have too. Because this isn't just a repeat of 1274. This is a siege in reverse, a naval army attempting to breach a fortified coast. You and thousands of others are stranded just offshore, clinging to boats that sway like hammocks in the summer currents, waiting for the order to disembark. But the wall won't let you in. You know the Mongols don't like waiting. They prefer thunderclap victories, quick demolitions, gallops, and yells. But here in this tight bay with no room to maneuver with walls they can't scale from ships, time becomes the enemy. And so the Mongols resort to nighttime raids. Small detachments row toward the wall under cover of darkness. They hope to scale it, surprise the defenders, maybe breach a weak point. The Japanese are ready. They've stationed guards every few meters armed with torches, bells, and bows. When the raiders land, they're met with immediate resistance arrows from above, swords from the sides, and burning pitch from overhead. Here's a quirky bit: the Japanese developed a strategy of boarding enemy ships at night. Samurai would row out to the anchored Mongol fleet in pitch-black silence, clamber aboard sleeping ships, and start cutting. Like pirates in reverse. Imagine dozing off in your hammock and waking to find a masked swordsman looming over you, katana raised. Sleep is no longer a safe option. The Mongols react by trying to lash their ships together into floating fortresses. It's a tactic they've used on rivers before, tying hulls together with rope, placing planks across the decks to form a sort of artificial battlefield. But here in the open sea, the setup is shaky. Waves buck the platforms, the planks slip, horses panic. You're stuck on something that feels less like a war machine and more like a floating puzzle about to come undone. Historians still argue whether the Mongol command underestimated Japanese resolve or overestimated the loyalty of their own diverse army. Many of the conscripted Chinese sailors were not enthusiastic about this second invasion. Some were pressed into service under threat. Others may have even aided the Japanese by misnavigating fleets or sabotaging anchors. The Japanese, meanwhile, begin launching fireship small vessels filled with burning pitch, sent drifting toward the Mongol armada at night. They don't need to sink anything. They just need to cause confusion. A single burning mast can light up dozens of ships in panic. You've seen it happen. The fire spreads, the ropes catch, and before long men are diving overboard to escape the flames. And you're stuck on a ship near the edge of the floating fleet, feeling like you're trapped in a waiting room to hell. The food is stale. The air smells like sweat and mildew. Morale is low. Your comrades whisper about curses about the gods of Japan who despise foreign sails. You roll your eyes, but you sleep with one hand on your sword now. One fringe detail: the Japanese archers used messages tied to their arrows. Not always for practical intel, but sometimes as spiritual warnings. One popular phrase translates roughly to, "This is the judgment of the kami." It's not meant to be read, it's meant to be felt. And you do feel it. Because something's wrong. The invasion was supposed to be fast, overwhelming. But it's turned into a slow bleed. You haven't made real landfall. Your supplies are dwindling. And the worst part, the Southern Fleet hasn't arrived yet. You were supposed to link up with them weeks ago. Without their numbers, this northern force is vulnerable. You don't know it yet, but the Southern Fleet is delayed, caught in storm supply confusion and mutinies. Which means you're alone, floating exposed and utterly unprepared for what's about to hit. You lie back against the creaking hull and look up at the sky. The stars are unusually bright. Too bright. The air feels thick. A breeze curls over the bay, but it's not a kind one. You remember the stories from last time. You remember the wind. You wake before dawn to a strange silence. No drums, no oars, no shouting. Just a low moan from the sea and the gentle creak of ships shifting against their moorings. It's the kind of silence that makes the hairs on your arms stand straight, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that says something is wrong. Then the wind hits. It doesn't arrive politely. It slams into the fleet like a vengeful god, howling across the decks, ripping loose canvas, snapping masts like brittle twigs. Your ship lurches hard to one side and you scramble for balance feet, skidding on the slick planks. Someone screams. Someone else vomits. Then another sound rises, waves great black jaws of water, opening wide and crashing down with a fury that no armor can block. You've seen bad weather before. But this isn't weather. This is punishment. The Mongol fleet begins to unravel almost immediately. Ships crash into each other, ropes snap, rudders break. The lashed-together fortresses you built in desperation. Now they work against you. One ship goes down and pulls 3 more with it. Men are thrown into the water like dice from an angry gambler's hand. Historians still debate the scale of the storm, whether it was a full typhoon or a freak seasonal cyclone. But no one denies the outcome. Thousands of ships caught helpless in the bay are shredded, overturned, sunk. Some smash against the Japanese-built walls at Hakata, others against each other. The sea turns black with debris, then red with blood. You try to hold on. You grip the mast now, tilting like a dying tree, and watch as a Korean transport flips end over end, spilling its cargo of horses and men into the churning void. One man tries to swim to shore, dragging a chest of arrows behind him. He doesn't make it, and there are screams. So many screams cut short by the water, the wind, the impossible weight of it all. Fire breaks out on some of the ship's pitch stores, ignited by lightning or panic. Flames leap from one deck to another. You see silhouettes running through smoke before the ships vanish under the waves. Remember that horse from earlier? The one that was seasick and pathetic during the crossing? You spot one now swimming in circles beside the wreck of a supply barge. Its eyes are wide and white, and its saddle drifts beside it like a memory. For some reason, that image haunts you more than the dead men. The Japanese on shore do nothing. They don't need to. They watch from behind their wall, the storm doing their work for them. Some fire a few arrows, but mostly they just wait calm, still reverent. They see this for what it is: divine intervention, the kamikaze, the divine wind. For the second time in history, a typhoon has struck at just the right moment to destroy an invading Mongol force. The first in 1274 was miraculous. This second one, it's prophetic. Japanese monks will write of this for centuries. Poets will sing it into legend. Children will grow up hearing stories not of samurai valor, but of sacred wind that protected the islands. Temples are built to thank the sea gods. Rituals are held to honor the spirits of those who perished. The kami, the ancestral forces of nature, are believed to have risen against the Mongol horde. And who could argue, back on your ship, what's left of it, you're no longer thinking of conquest. You're thinking of survival. Your hands are raw from gripping soaked rope. Your clothes are soaked. Your sword is somewhere at the bottom of the bay. And you're bleeding, though you can't tell from where. You make it to a floating plank. You cling to it. You drift. You see others, men from a dozen nations, doing the same. Some call out for help in languages you don't understand. Others are already silent, floating face down. One quirky fact: Japanese villagers would later capture many Mongol survivors washed up on their shores. Some were executed, some were enslaved. A few were interrogated about their strange weapons and tactics. One group, apparently stranded on an offshore island, lived for months before being discovered, and, well, the records don't say. But if you were lucky, you never made it to shore. Historians still argue about the numbers. Some say 70% of the invasion fleet was lost. Others suggest higher. What's certain is that thousands, tens of thousands, died in a single night. Not from sword or arrow, but from water. You drift for what feels like hours, maybe days. You see broken hulls, shattered oars, cargo crates bobbing beside you like ghosts of a campaign that never landed. Somewhere beneath you, the seabed is now littered with armor weapons bones. An underwater graveyard stretching miles. And you realize something. This wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. You wash up on a stretch of beach so quiet it feels like the world itself is holding its breath. The sand is warm beneath you, coarse and gritty, stuck in every crease of your fingers and boots. The sky is soft gray, the storm now long gone, but the evidence remains all around you. You sit up slowly, bones aching, drenched to the marrow. Your armor is gone, your sword gone, your sense of purpose. That washed away sometime between the third and fourth capsized ship. You're not alone. All along the shoreline, the detritus of the invasion lies scattered like driftwood with a grudge. Broken hulls with names painted in Yuan characters, arrows still quivering in the sand, helmets half buried by the tide, and bodies. So many bodies. Some curled like children in sleep, others sprawled as if still trying to claw their way inland. Further down the coast, a samurai warband stands in silence watching. They don't charge. They don't shout. They just observe, assessing the damage, maybe even offering a prayer. Because this is no longer war. This is aftermath. You're alive somehow. Not captured, not killed. Just overlooked. Maybe they thought you were already dead. Maybe you're too far down the beach to be worth the trouble. Or maybe even the samurai feel some reverence for the storm's decision. Historians still argue whether this beach landing ever technically counted as a battle. No clash of swords, no strategic maneuvers. Just a weather event with the precision of divine artillery. But survivors like you don't argue. You just start walking. You find a fishing village. It's abandoned. Or hiding. Bowls still sit on tables. Chopsticks on the floor. The wind rattled everything but didn't carry it all away. You take a half-dry cloak from a line and wrap yourself like a thief in someone else's life. You eat cold rice from a forgotten pot. It tastes like ashes. Back in Japan's interior, the shogunate is already holding emergency councils. This victory, though unearned by sword, is overwhelming. And yet it raises complicated questions. What do you do with all the survivors? How do you rebuild the coastline? And most pressing, how do you pay for all of it? The cost of defense has been monumental. The stone walls, the night raids, the fire ships, it all took money and labor. And the samurai expect rewards. But there's no land to distribute, no loot to hand out. Just the bodies of foreigners and splinters of ruined ships. A quirky note here, this economic strain would slowly erode the shogunate's grip on power. Samurai who fought in both invasions, who had risked everything, found themselves unpaid and unrewarded. Discontent brewed like a slow poison under a veneer of victory. Meanwhile, you, one of the few lucky ones, join a ragged band of survivors. Mostly Chinese sailors, a few Mongol foot soldiers. Some can barely walk. Others have turned their helmets into soup pots. You try to find a boat. Any boat. Maybe you can make it to Korea, maybe not. You reach an island, perhaps Tsushima or one of the smaller rocks in the Genkai Sea. You're not sure, it doesn't matter. You hide by day, move by night. You pray not to be noticed. Some of your comrades are caught. You hear the shouts, the clatter of sandals on rocks. Then silence, and then unexpectedly mercy. A Buddhist monk finds you. He doesn't run, doesn't shout, just looks at your soaked figure, your sunken eyes, and offers you a piece of barley bread. You take it trembling. He says nothing, just turns and disappears back into the trees. That was the thing about Japan. While it was fiercely proud, deeply defensive, and sometimes ruthlessly brutal, it was also layered in ritual compassion and strange contradictions. You saw it in the men who fought at Hakata. You saw it in the way they didn't pursue you after the storm. And you see it now in this nameless monk. Historians still discuss whether Japan's victory was truly strategic or simply providential. It didn't matter. What mattered was the message: Japan would not be taken. Not by sea, not by force, not by Kublai Khan. Eventually you're rescued. Maybe by a Korean fishing vessel, maybe by sheer luck. You return not to a hero's welcome, but to a court in Yuan, China, asking awkward questions. What happened to the ships? What happened to the men? And most of all, what happened to Kublai's vision? You have no answers. All you know is that the sea doesn't care how big your empire is. The waves don't flinch at banners. And the wind decides. Back in Japan, they begin to rebuild. Not their cities. Those were untouched, but their confidence, their walls, their sense of self. After two invasions and two miraculous storms, the Japanese begin to believe something deep in their bones the gods are watching. And more importantly, the gods are protecting. You're not in Japan anymore, but let's keep you there in spirit. Imagine you're a stonemason in Hakata. The tide has calmed, the shorelines are littered with shipwreck fragments, and your job is to finish what was started years ago, the wall. The original seawall had done its duty. It stopped the landings, forced the Mongols into awkward positions, bought the defenders time. But it could be better, stronger, higher, wiser. So more masons are brought in, more stones dragged from quarries, more prayers offered at every foundation. And while this labor continues, the shogunate begins a review. They don't call it that, of course. But in the halls of Kamakura, scrolls are unfurled, names are listed, and debts are counted, not gold debts, but honor debts. Samurai who fought, who bled, expect rewards. And there lies the problem: there are no spoils. The Mongols didn't occupy land. They didn't leave behind riches or cities to plunder. They brought fire and loss and then vanished into the waves. There are no new territories to govern, no vassals to tax. And yet the warriors of Japan gave everything. Their armor still hangs damp in their homes. Their horses are still limping. So now the Kamakura shogunate faces an uncomfortable truth: they cannot pay the very men who defended the nation. This isn't just a budget issue. It's an existential crisis, because samurai loyalty is tied to reward rice fields retainers' influence. Without it, ambition turns to bitterness, and bitterness has sharp edges. Historians still argue how deeply this unpaid frustration sowed the seeds of later instability. But the echo is undeniable. The shogunate, once riding high on waves of divine intervention, now begins a slow drift toward decay. Meanwhile, ordinary people begin telling stories. One quirky result of the invasions: a booming trade in relics. Villagers up and down the coast find rusted swords, strange arrowheads, even fragments of Mongol armor washed ashore. These become prized objects displayed at temples, used as offerings, sometimes even sold in markets. One famous story tells of a farmer who found a Mongol helmet and turned it into a water basin for his horse. Whether true or not, it gives you a sense of how the extraordinary became mundane. And then, of course, there are the monks. Buddhist temples across Japan begin interpreting the invasions as divine confirmation. Shrines are established to thank the kami, the spirits who sent the storms. Rituals evolve. Prayers are formalized. A new cultural mythology is taking root with the kamikaze, not as mere weather, but as the very hand of heaven. You'd think this would be a moment of national unity, and it is in part. But also something more subtle is happening. Japan begins to see itself as set apart, not just geographically, but spiritually. The sea is no longer a barrier, it is a shield. And what's on the other side? Danger, disorder, foreignness. The invasions inadvertently reinforce a cultural inwardness. The idea that Japan is not just an island, but an island destined to remain itself untouched by the chaos beyond its shores. That doesn't mean they ignore the world. Japanese scholars begin collecting information about the Yuan. Monks copy stories told by Chinese refugees. Artists illustrate the invasion in intricate hand scrolls. Emaki complete with swirling typhoons panicked. Soldiers and proud samurai. These scrolls aren't just art. They're propaganda woven with brushstrokes. One of them, the Moko Shurai Ekotoba, or illustrated account of the Mongol invasions, becomes particularly famous. You can still see it today: images of Japanese defenders repelling invaders' explosions, lighting up the surf arrows flying like reeds in the wind. You linger on one detail: the faces of the Mongols are drawn deliberately different, fiercer, rougher rather. It's subtle, but it helps build a narrative: us versus them. homeland versus empire, sacred versus profane. And the samurai, those landless heroes, they too are immortalized. Some real, some fictional, all honorable. Back in Kamakura, the political apparatus is still intact but creaking. The regents who rule in the name of the shogun are increasingly out of touch. Their advisors bicker. Their messages to distant lords are met with silence. The victory so clear on the beaches is muddy in the halls of power. And you've returned scarred, unsure of your place. If you're a Mongol soldier, maybe you're nursing injuries somewhere along the Yellow Sea, haunted by dreams of waves that whisper in your sleep. If you're a Japanese fisher, maybe you've found a Mongol helmet lodged in your net and wonder what ghost it might carry. And if you're the wind, well, maybe you're just waiting. You live in a country holding its breath. The second Mongol invasion has come and gone, swept away like driftwood in a typhoon, but no one in Japan is celebrating. Not really. There's no grand parade, no festivals of victory. Instead, there's a creeping silence, a long exhale that never quite finishes. Because everyone is thinking the same thing. What if they come back? You, like many others, walk the beaches near Hakata almost every morning now. You scan the horizon out of habit. There's no fleet today, just gulls and sea spray, but the memory is fresh. Too fresh. You can still feel the tremble of the earth when the storm hit. You still hear the clatter of debris washing ashore. And so Japan enters what historians often call the Decade of Dread. The Mongols have failed twice. But they're still out there, still vast, still wealthy, still angry. Kublai Khan hasn't died. He hasn't apologized, he hasn't even responded. And if he built a fleet once, twice, what's to stop him from building a third? So Japan prepares? Again. But how do you prepare for something that may never happen? Well, you keep building. More walls, more watchtowers, more signal fires. You organize the coast into patrol zones. You train young samurai in archery and horseback tactics. You invent emergency drills before emergency drills were even a thing. You even set up early versions of neighborhood defense associations. And you pray. Buddhist monks become national celebrities in a way that would confuse most warriors. These aren't just priests, now they're frontline defenders of the spiritual realm. They conduct ceremonies to honor the kami who sent the storms. They chant to calm the sea spirits in case they decide to nap the next time an invasion shows up. One quirky bit, some temples begin commissioning wind-related talismans. Little folded paper charms tied with string meant to flutter in the breeze and attract divine favor. You're supposed to hang them near your doorway, or your boat, or your armor. And it's not uncommon for samurai to tie a small paper charm to the hilt of their swords. The belief is simple: if the gods saved us once, they might do it again. But we have to show we're worth saving. Meanwhile, the Kamakura shogunate is doing its best to stay in control. But the cracks are showing. The samurai who defended the coasts are growing restless. There's no land to distribute, no great victory spoils, no Mongol castles turned into tea gardens, and a frustrated warrior is not a quiet one. Some begin roaming. Not as bandits, but as Ronin masterless samurai looking for work or meaning. Others turn inward, investing in meditation, swordplay, or poetry. A few take up farming, which proves harder than war and far less poetic. And then there's the politics. Historians still argue whether the Hojo regents, the real power behind the shogunate, understood just how fragile their authority had become. They controlled Japan through a network of vassals' appointments and military governors. But loyalty was fraying. And without a common enemy at the gates, internal rivalries began to bubble. Ironically, the Mongol threat had unified Japan like never before. The fear was glue. And now that fear is fading. Kublai Khan on the other side of the sea isn't silent, but he's distracted. After the second invasion fails, he still considers a third. Preparations begin. Ships are built, armies reorganized. But he's also dealing with rebellions in the south, problems with the Vietnamese, and administrative headaches in China. His resources are stretched. His advisors urge caution. Some whisper that perhaps the divine wind was a sign not to press further. And maybe Kublai listens, or maybe he just runs out of time. Because by 1294, he's gone. Dead. His vast empire remains but fragmented. Less hungry, less focused. Still, the Japanese don't know that yet. For years after his death, rumors continue of secret fleets of Yuan generals planning revenge. You sleep with your armor by the door. You check the sky before fishing. You teach your children what to do if they see sails on the horizon. And over time, that tension becomes tradition. One fringe result: the growth of coastal Buddhism. Temples near the shore begin developing special rites and ceremonies tied to sea protection. Local festivals include mock battles, storm dances, and ritual boat processions meant to honor the spirits who once intervened. Even today, some of those festivals survive. You walk the beach one more time before nightfall. The sea is calm now, but you still imagine shapes on the horizon. A mast here, a broken sail there. Ghost ships, perhaps. Or just memory lingering like salt in the air. You've survived 2 invasions and a decade of fear. You're still standing. But the gods, you hope they're still listening. You're back in China now, more specifically somewhere deep in the heart of the Yuan dynasty, where scrolls are thicker than winter cloaks and bureaucrats move slower than glaciers. And you're standing amid the impossible task Kublai Khan has set in motion, building the largest invasion fleet the world has ever seen. Again, it's 1280 and the planning for the second invasion of Japan is in full chaotic swing. The first failure blamed on haste. This time Kublai will be thorough. Painfully, catastrophically thorough. He wants not just conquest, he wants humiliation. Japan will become a cautionary tale carved into the very bones of the sea. So what does that look like? It starts with boats. Lots of them. The southern fleet, based out of China's Fujian and Jiangsu provinces, is ordered to produce more than 3,000 vessels. Many are built by forcibly conscripted shipwrights who probably had other plans that year. Others are simply repurposed merchant vessels, hastily converted into warships with questionable modifications like raised platforms for archers or ramps for horses that definitely didn't volunteer. The numbers vary. Scholars still argue the exact count, but estimates land somewhere between 3,500 and 4,400 ships for the combined northern and southern fleets. It's excessive, it's impressive, and it's kind of a disaster waiting to happen. You walk through one of the shipyards. The air smells like wet sawdust and desperation. Men hammer planks without enthusiasm. Officials in silk robes bark about quotas. Supervisors carry scrolls filled with logistics that no one actually understands. Horses arrive in carts looking unimpressed. And here's a fun fringe detail: some ships were 2-story floating towers, complete with balconies and flags designed more for psychological effect than seaworthiness. They looked terrifying until they hit choppy waters and started behaving like tipsy pavilions. Supplies begin to pile up. Bamboo arrows bound in bundles. Barrels of dried fish and millet cakes stacked like siege towers of the digestive system. Kublai even arranges for portable forges in case repairs are needed mid-sea. There's no detail too small, no contingency too ridiculous. But the cracks are already showing. There's no standard ship design. Some boats are fast, others are lumbering. Some can handle open sea, others can barely stay afloat in a stiff breeze. It's like trying to organize a marathon using bicycles, stilts, and wheelbarrows. You look around and realize something else: not everyone wants to be here. The conscripted Chinese sailors resent the forced labor. The Korean crews feel like they've already paid their dues after the 1274 disaster. Even some Mongol officers are skeptical. This whole sea thing just feels unnatural. And yet the machine keeps turning. Kublai is determined. Historians still debate whether Kublai Khan was driven by genuine ambition to rule all of East Asia, or if Japan became a personal obsession, a metaphorical itch he could never stop scratching. Either way, he spares no expense. To coordinate the effort, Kublai creates a bureaucratic nightmare worthy of a comedy play. There are separate command structures for the northern and southern fleets. Supplies go missing. Orders get miscommunicated. At one point, a shipment of arrows is accidentally delivered to a rice depot and vice versa. No one laughs. They're too tired. The Southern Fleet launches late, plagued by weather and logistical delays. The plan is to meet the Korean fleet near Iki Island and attack Japan in a pincer movement. In theory, it's brilliant. In practice, the timing is about as synchronized as a broken sundial. And still the soldiers come. Mongols, Koreans, Chinese, Uyghurs. A stew of cultures with little in common beyond fear, confusion, and seasickness. You share a cramped sleeping deck with 6 strangers who don't speak your language, but definitely share your despair. There are moments of absurdity. A cavalry unit practices charging on the ship deck, only to splinter 3 railings and fall into the ocean. A junior officer insists on carrying a pet falcon on board, which escapes and now circles the mast screaming at everyone. A translator forgets the Japanese word for surrender and ends up negotiating a basket of fish instead. The absurdity masks something darker. This campaign feels cursed. Whispers start. Quiet mutters from the crews about the storm last time. About the kamikaze. About how maybe the gods really do live in Japan. A few sailors refuse to board. One captain prays to the sea every morning, his incense sticks balanced on the prow. You pretend you're above it, but even you find yourself tying a charm to your armor, just in case. And then the drums, the orders, the launch. Thousands of ships begin to slide into the sea like oversized coffins, one by one groaning under the weight of soldiers, weapons, animals, and bad planning. You stand on the deck of your assigned vessel, gripping the rail, looking out at the endless horizon. Somewhere out there is Japan. And between you and it, the wind. You land eventually, sort of. The Mongol fleet, well, one half of it anyway, has reached Japan's shores again. And you find yourself on deck peering through the salt mist toward Hakata Bay. It's been 7 years since the last invasion, but the Japanese haven't been lounging around drinking tea. No, they've been practicing, training, changing. You remember how the samurai fought in 1274? One-on-one duels, flourished introductions, all very dramatic and tragically ineffective against Mongol precision warfare. But now they've adapted. You step onto the beach and it's chaos, but not the kind you expect. You're hit almost instantly, not by arrows, but by strategy. Teams of archers from behind newly reinforced fortifications fire in waves. Horsemen wait until your troops are off the boats, then charge from wooded trails in flanking sweeps. You try to rally your unit, but the sounds around you are all unfamiliar. The whistle of arrows, the splash of falling bodies, and the dull, unpleasant thud of hoofbeats on wet sand. This is not the same Japan. The samurai have shifted from individual glory to group tactics. No longer do they waste time shouting their names and waiting for a fair fight. Now they strike in coordinated strikes, retreating, baiting, swarming. One moment you're chasing someone into the trees, the next you're surrounded and being pelted by arrows from above. Historians still debate exactly how much the Mongol invasions influenced the evolution of the samurai class. But here on the battlefield, the change is obvious. The romantic image of the lone warrior replaced with something leaner, meaner, and very much alive. You duck as an arrow thunks into the side of your shield. You don't even have time to shout before a second hits your comrade square in the thigh. He goes down hard, cursing in a mix of Mongolian and Chinese. You drag him back to the boat's heart pounding. The Japanese don't pursue far, they never overextend, but they don't need to, because the real war hasn't even begun yet. The second Mongol invasion is supposed to be a double-pronged masterpiece. The Northern Fleet from Korea arrives first your group and is tasked with engaging the enemy, drawing them in. Then the larger Southern Fleet from China will arrive with overwhelming numbers and crush Japanese resistance. Only Anna the Southern Fleet is late, like mysteriously late. So now your smaller, weary force is trapped, beached on a hostile shore, facing better defenses, more experienced opponents, and the growing dread that your backup might never come. To buy time, your commanders order the construction of a makeshift base near the shoreline. Fortifications are hammered together from ships' timbers, driftwood, and stolen lumber. It's crude but functional. You're told to guard it. You do mostly by pretending not to notice how hungry everyone is. Meanwhile, the samurai increase pressure with nightly raids. They've learned your weak points, where you store rations, how slow your response time is, who your most vulnerable officers are. They strike under cover of night, killing a handful and vanishing like mist. Sometimes they even sneak aboard ships in the dark, setting fires and vanishing before anyone wakes. One quirky detail: some samurai reportedly wore black face paint during night raids, not for camouflage, but to terrify. It worked. Morale sags. Rations run low. You're living on dried fish, moldy biscuits, and the occasional unlucky crab. The horses are getting nervous. The officers argue in whispers. Someone tries to swim for it and is never seen again. Then finally the Southern Fleet arrives. You expect a glorious surge of reinforcements. Instead, they limp in like a parade of battered ghosts. Delayed by storms, plagued by infighting, and slowed by overloaded ships, they're not fresh. They're exhausted. Half the ships already show signs of hull damage. Some have already been lost to the sea, and now you're supposed to go back on the offensive. Historians still argue whether there was ever a real chance of success once the delay happened. Could a unified Mongol force have taken Japan? Maybe, but you'll never know. Because just as you begin to regroup to plan a larger assault inland, the clouds begin to darken. The breeze that's been pleasant all morning starts turning sharp. The air grows heavy, humming with static like a drawn breath that won't release. You look up then to the sea, and it's happening again. You've felt wind before. You've marched through dry steppes with it slicing across your face like a dull knife. You've crossed river deltas where it came in wet gusts, heavy with the smell of silt. You've even seen it dance across the sea, tugging at sails and flags. But this isn't wind. This is warning. It starts with a hollow roar like something boiling just below the surface of the world. Then come the gusts, strong and sudden, snapping ropes and flattening tents. The ships at anchor begin to sway. You watch as a stack of crates topples into the water. A plank cartwheels across the sand like it's fleeing something it refuses to name. Someone tries to joke it's just a storm. We've survived worse. You don't laugh, no one does. Because you've heard the stories, you were the story, and now it's happening again. The typhoon rolls in, not like weather, but like vengeance. The skies go green-gray, the sun blotted out behind clouds so dense they feel stitched to the earth. The rain starts sideways. Horses scream. Men dive for cover under anything that doesn't move and some things that do. Ships begin to spin in their moorings, straining against their anchor ropes. A few break free, crashing into their neighbors. You watch helplessly as one large troop carrier is lifted, turned like a leaf, and slammed into a rocky outcrop with a thunderous crack that you feel in your teeth. And then the real wind comes. It doesn't gust, it rips. It tears through the fleet with the force of a god's tantrum. You cling to a post, then lose your grip, then find yourself tumbling headfirst into a crate of iron spearheads. They rattle like bones. A tent pole flies past your head. Someone shouts a prayer, then disappears beneath a falling mast. This was supposed to be Kublai Khan's masterpiece. The fleet that would secure his legacy, the one that would finally break Japan. But the gods, if they exist, clearly have other plans. Historians still debate how much of the fleet was lost in this second typhoon. Some say 60%. Others claim it was closer to 80%. What they agree on is the Southern Fleet bore the brunt. Many of its ships were deep-sea vessels not built for the coastal chaos of Hakata Bay. Once the wind hit, they turned into driftwood and waiting. And those giant multi-decked command ships, the ones that looked so impressive during inspections, they flipped like toys. The weight of their upper decks made them top-heavy, and when the typhoon struck, they rolled and cracked apart like overripe melons. You claw your way up the muddy bank fingers, digging into roots and wet rock. Behind you, the sea roars like a lion, furious and full of broken things. You glance back and see sails shredded into ribbons, hulls torn open like fruit, flags, so many flags scattered across the water like fallen birds, and bodies, so many bodies. You'd seen death in 1274, but this is different. This isn't war, it's a purge. You drag yourself beneath an overturned cart. You curl up beside a sack of rice, so moldy even the rats aren't touching it. You stay there shivering, listening to the groaning of timber and the mournful sound of wind in broken hulls. When the storm finally ends hours later, maybe days, you crawl out to a world transformed. The camp is gone, flattened. The fortifications reduced to piles of debris. The fleet, what remains of it, is scattered in splinters from one end of the bay to the other. A few ships still float. A few men still move. But not many. And no one's talking about regrouping. No one's sharpening swords. There is only stunned silence and retreat. You and the other survivors don't even wait for orders. You just start moving back toward the sea. Back toward anything that floats. Some swim. Some cling to barrels. A few are captured by the Japanese, but even they seem more bewildered than vengeful. Here's a fringe detail for you. A small number of Mongol sailors were taken alive, and some of them eventually settled in Japan, forcibly or otherwise. A few even married locals. Their descendants likely walk Japanese soil today. The storm long faded the legacy, living in unexpected ways. But most don't make it. Back in China, the Southern Command hears nothing for weeks. Then ragged reports trickle in. Survivors arrive exhausted, wounded, traumatized. The truth begins to take shape. The greatest invasion force in Mongol history gone consumed by the sea. Historians still puzzle over it. How could the mighty Yuan Empire, the conqueror of China, Central Asia, Korea, and parts of Eastern Europe, fail so catastrophically in Japan? Some say hubris, others say logistics, most say the wind. You don't know. You just know you survived. But just barely. And that changes a person. You're not sure how long it's been, days, maybe weeks. Time gets strange when you spend it crawling through shipwrecks, drinking rainwater from broken helmets, and avoiding patrols that may or may not want you alive. But you're alive, that's what matters. And you're not alone. As the storm clouds dissipate, survivors begin to gather in ragged groups clinging to wreckage, limping through coastal thickets, sometimes hiding in caves or abandoned fishing huts. It's an odd multilingual mosaic of fear and confusion. You hear Mongolian curses, Korean sobs, Chinese prayers, some argue. Some stare silently into the sea. What's missing is leadership. The high command gone. Drowned, fled. Kublai's carefully stacked pyramid of officers' aides, Translators, astrologers, and ceremonial tea pourers has been flattened by wind and wave. What remains is a leaderless mass too scattered to reorganize and too exhausted to care. So what do? You scavenge, you survive, you wait for rescue. And meanwhile, on the Japanese side of the shore, something unexpected happens mercy. Not everywhere and not often, but in small pockets, Japanese villagers and monks begin collecting survivors not to punish, but to treat, to bury, even to feed. Historians still argue the motivation behind this mercy. Was it compassion? A desire to avoid karmic punishment? Or simply practicality? Wounded foreigners could be interrogated, used, converted into labor? The answer may be all of the above. You find yourself on a boat eventually, not one from the UN Navy, but a local junk, piloted by a half-suspicious, half-amused Korean sailor who picked up stragglers along the coast. You don't speak his dialect and he doesn't ask questions. He just points you toward a bundle of dry seaweed and throws you a flask of rice liquor. You drink. It tastes like forgiveness. Back in Japan, the military leaders are breathing easier but not relaxing. The threat is over, yes, but the memory that will last for centuries. The Japanese begin conducting post-mortems. They analyze wreckage, study Mongol weapons, examine armor. Scrolls are written, military doctrines updated, watchtowers reinforced. And then there's the culture. Because what happened here, what you survived, is quickly becoming myth. Word spreads of the kamikaze, the divine wind, that twice protected Japan from conquest. The monks, the samurai, even the peasants begin retelling the story, each adding flourishes. In one version, the gods themselves rode the storm, their blades slicing through sails. In another, the spirits of fallen warriors rose from the sea to drag the invaders down. One quirky footnote. The word kamikaze wasn't widely used until later, but its origin traces here to the typhoons that defended the island. It means divine wind, and though at this point it refers to literal weather one day, centuries later it will take on a far darker, far more human meaning. But that's not your concern for now. You're still trying to get home. You follow a broken trail through rice paddies and fishing villages. In some towns, you're chased away with sticks. In others, you're offered food and a silent bow. You come to respect the land not just for its beauty, but for its resilience. Japan is no longer just an island to you. It's a force. Meanwhile, news finally reaches Yuan China. Kublai Khan is devastated. Not publicly, of course, he's still the great Khan emperor of half the known world. But the whispers are impossible to ignore. 2 invasions, 2 disasters, and not a single foothold gained. His advisors begin suggesting more reasonable ventures, suppressing rebellions, expanding southward, securing the borders. No one mentions Japan anymore, not out loud. Historians still debate whether Kublai truly considered a third invasion. Some records say he began preparations. Others claim it was all theater, a face-saving measure for the court. Either way, by the early 1290s, the plans are quietly shelved. And by 1294, Kublai is dead. You hear about it months later in a seaport from a man with a chipped tooth and a scar shaped like a comma. He's drinking cheap sake and muttering about new taxes. He says the old Khan's gone and a new ruler's in charge. He doesn't sound impressed. You don't say much, you just sit there staring into the surf. Because while Kublai's dreams lie at the bottom of Hakata Bay, your memories are still very much afloat. You've seen an empire stretch itself too far. You've watched an island refuse to bend. You've heard the wind scream like a god. And you've survived. That's more than most can say. You return to the sea one last time. Not as an invader, not as a soldier, but as something more ghost than man. The coastline stretches before you, deceptively calm with white gulls circling overhead. and waves lapping at the shore like a sleeping dog's breath, but you know better. Because you remember what happened here, you remember the storm. And so do the Japanese. The typhoon of 1281 becomes more than a weather event, it becomes foundational. The entire narrative of the nation reshapes around it. Japan isn't merely lucky to have survived. No, it is destined to remain unconquered. That's what the monks say. That's what the samurai teach their sons. That's what the court poets inscribe in gold leaf. The storm becomes identity, and identity becomes myth. Temples across Kyushu and Honshu begin holding regular ceremonies in honor of the kami who sent the wind. Offerings of rice sake and plum blossoms are left at coastal shrines. You'd think the gods would prefer thunder and fire, but apparently they're partial to fermented grain and flowers. One shrine in particular, Hakozaki Shrine near Fukuoka, becomes a symbol of this divine protection. Destroyed during the Mongol landings, it's rebuilt with great care, its prayer hall, resounding with chants thanking the heavens for Japan's preservation. People come from miles away to pray there, not just for peace, but for protection from the unknown. Historians still argue whether this shift in thinking, this wind-fed nationalism, contributed to Japan's later isolationist policies. Did the storms convince the shogunate that foreign contact only brought disaster? Or was that a convenient excuse when trade became inconvenient? Centuries later, either way, the seeds were planted. And for you, if you're still lingering near the coast, it's easy to see why. The island feels closed now. Not in hostility, but in reverence. Like a temple with the doors gently shut. Meanwhile, back across the sea, the Mongol Empire is starting to wobble. Kublai Khan's court, once so efficient, becomes bloated and bureaucratic. Successors squabble. Provincial governors hoard power. The edges fray. The grand dream of a world-spanning Mongol dynasty begins to unravel not with fire, but with paperwork. You hear tales of rebellions in Burma, failed campaigns in Vietnam, tax revolts in China. You even hear whispers that the imperial treasury is low, not because of the invasions exactly, but because of everything. The cost of constant expansion was always going to come due. But there's something else you hear too, something that sticks with you. In the coastal villages of China and Korea, fishermen begin to recover strange artifacts, curved swords, lacquered armor, foreign coinage. The debris of a failed empire scattered across the seafloor. Some items are collected, others are worshipped. Still others are sold to curious travelers. One quirky tidbit. In the 20th century, centuries after your death, underwater archaeologists will rediscover these wrecks. Near the coast of Takashima, they'll find Mongol ship remains preserved in silt iron anchors, bronze mirrors, broken helmets. And even then, the scholars will argue, was it hubris or fate? Engineering flaws or divine intervention? You could answer them if you were still there. But instead, you just drift along the edge of the narrative somewhere between truth and legend. You remember how your comrades tried to lash ships together in the bay? How they prayed to unfamiliar gods? How they carved protective charms into their swords? You remember a man who claimed the storm was sent because the Emperor of Japan had bathed in the sacred spring that morning. You remember another who laughed until he drowned. What happened here will not be forgotten. Because Japan didn't just survive, it endured. It repelled an empire not once but twice. Not with superior numbers, not with better weapons, but with will and with weather. And the world takes note. In distant courts across Asia, tales of the failed Mongol invasions spread. The Yuan dynasty, so long considered unstoppable now, has its limits exposed. And Japan becomes the mountain that could not be moved. Back on the beaches of Hakata, the stones are still damp with sea salt. Children play where warriors once fell. Fishermen haul nets through water still holding broken hulls beneath. And the wind gentle now whispers through pine trees planted in memory of the storm. You exhale, deeply, softly, because finally after all the noise silence has returned. And this time it stays. Years pass, then decades. And the story as stories tend to do begins to grow larger than life. You're gone by now, either in the literal sense, your bones scattered in some unnamed bay, or figuratively swallowed up by a life that moved on. But the Mongol invasions of Japan, those never fade. Instead, they ferment. You might be amused to learn that in the generations following the invasions, the memory of the kamikaze, that fabled divine wind, evolves into something not just remembered, but revered. A cornerstone of national myth. It enters the bloodstream of Japanese identity like a quiet fever, protective, proud, and permanent. The kamikaze becomes the defining symbol of Japan's uniqueness, its otherness. Not just geographically, but spiritually. Other countries build walls. Japan is walled by the gods. You walk again this time through the corridors of the Kamakura shogunate. The buildings creak with age, the gardens are still, but inside things are tense. The shogunate survived the Mongols, but barely. Economically, it's on shaky ground. Politically, it's brittle. And spiritually, well, it's trying to keep up with the legend it's now expected to maintain. One of the main problems samurai loyalty is slipping. The warriors who fought in both invasions, those who defended the coast, who built the seawalls, who launched fire ships in the dark, they never got what they were promised. No spoils, no new lands, just calligraphy scrolls thanking them for their bravery, and that's about it. And as any seasoned soldier will tell you, thanks doesn't buy rice. So uprisings start to flicker. Discontent simmers among the Gokinen, the vassal samurai class, and the Hojo regents who've ruled from behind the shogun for decades begin to lose their grip. Meanwhile, in temples and villages, the kamikaze legend keeps growing. It's told in different ways, sometimes with dragon gods who whip up the waves, other times with ancestors who breathe storms from the mountaintops. Artists paint scenes of divine figures pushing ships underwater. Priests perform rituals reenacting the winds. Children are named after the storm. And in the shadow of these myths, Japan starts to turn inward. Historians still debate whether this inward turn was strategic or cultural. Was Japan simply protecting itself from future threats? Or was it indulging in a newfound belief that no one beyond its shores had anything useful to offer? Either way, by the 14th century, the policy of Sakoku closed country starts to bud long before it blooms officially. Trade becomes restricted. Foreign influence grows suspect. Christianity, when it finally arrives, will be welcomed briefly, then chased off with fire and steel. And the Mongols. They vanish from Japanese nightmares, replaced by newer fears. Internal conflict, civil war power struggles between temples, emperors, and shoguns. But every now and then, the wind picks up and people remember. Not with fear, but with awe. Back in Yuan China, the legacy of the invasions is very different. Kublai Khan's empire, after his death in 1294, begins to fracture. The Song territories in southern China, only recently conquered, resist assimilation. The tax burden from failed invasions bleeds local economies, and the once glorious fleets forgotten. The shipyards are quiet now. The bones of the vessels lie beneath the sea, barnacled and silent. A quirky fact: archaeologists centuries later will find Mongol shipwrecks with cargo still inside silk rolls, horse bones, even preserved writing tablets. One diver reports seeing a perfectly intact spear lodged in the ribs of a sunken hull, like a fossil of defiance. Meanwhile, Kublai's successors wrestle for control. The empire splits into 4 major khanates. None of them ever look at Japan again. The world moves on. But in Japan, the Mongol invasions leave a deeper legacy than anyone could have predicted. Military strategy evolves. The feudal system tightens. And the idea that Japan is blessed, sacred, protected, destined is here to stay. You walk through a village festival one summer, perhaps as a curious traveler or a ghost of memory. Children wear costumes of sea gods. Dancers whirl in imitation of waves. Drums mimic thunder. And someone somewhere offers a whispered prayer into the breeze, not to ask for protection, just to say thanks. Because they remember what happened. They always will. You find yourself in a quiet village somewhere along Kyushu's western coast, many years after the typhoons. It doesn't appear in any official chronicles, doesn't boast grand temples or famous samurai graves, just rice paddies, a crooked harbor, and a shrine that faces the sea like it's still expecting something. But even here in this humble place, the story survives. The oldest fisherman sits cross-legged beneath a pine tree, telling the tale to his grandchildren with a voice as weathered as the hulls bobbing nearby. "The sea once rose up and saved us," he says, pointing to the horizon. "It cracked their ships in half and swallowed their bones." The children gasp. One of them asks, "Was it a god?" He only shrugs. "Maybe." This perhaps is the most enduring part of the Mongol invasions. Not the battles, not the politics, not even the kamikaze storms themselves, but the story they became. Passed down like an heirloom, retold around fires, painted on scrolls, etched into prayer stones. Even those who doubt the divine still respect the result. Meanwhile, in the quiet chambers of Japanese scholars and monks, something more subtle is happening. The scrolls written after the invasions begin forming a new kind of literature, not just military history, but national philosophy. What does it mean, they ask, that Japan endured? That a great empire failed where smaller ones fell? Some write of the country's natural defenses, the mountainous terrain, the hard-to-land shores. Others more poetically describe Japan as a jade boat adrift in divine currents. It's romantic nonsense, but also powerful branding. Historians still argue over how much of this cultural self-concept stems from the invasions versus being retrofitted onto them. Did Japan believe it was exceptional because of the storm? Or did the storm simply reinforce something they already thought? Either way, the impact is undeniable. And so are the silences. Because while Japan basks in its mythic preservation, something else begins to shift, something less comfortable, harder to narrate with drum beats and banners. The samurai, once galvanized by a common enemy, begin to fracture. The warriors who defended the coast grow old, landless, and forgotten. Their sons, raised on tales of divine salvation, now question why their fathers live in obscurity. Tensions mount between local lords. The shogunate, weakened by its inability to reward loyalty, becomes a slow machine grinding toward rebellion. And rebellion will come. You, if you're wandering through time, might visit the Ashikaga who will rise to power after the Hojo fall. Or you might watch the Onin War ignite in Kyoto, tearing apart the capital with swords and suspicion. The Sengoku period, still a century off, will see the very class that saved Japan tear it limb from limb in search of supremacy. The Mongols won't cause that chaos, but they'll be the unseen hinge in the narrative. A pivot point. The moment when Japan's national character, its faith in being separate, sacred, storm-sheltered, truly solidifies. One quirky ripple. Even the architecture begins to reflect this shift. Coastal fortifications that once faced outward toward potential invaders are gradually adapted for domestic defense walls, not just to keep enemies out, but to keep neighbors at bay. The sea becomes less a battlefield, more a boundary, a reminder of what once was, and what was avoided. You stand on a rocky promontory high above the swirling tide and stare out at the water. The same sea that swallowed an empire, the same wind that changed the course of history. And you ask yourself, what if the storm hadn't come? It's a question the Japanese rarely ask aloud but always circle. If the Mongols had landed in force, if the samurai had broken, if Kublai had succeeded, would Japan still be Japan? Would the islands speak the same language? Would the Shinto shrines still face east? Would the stories of the storm be lost beneath centuries of Yuan rule? No one knows. And that uncertainty gives the legend power. Because the victory, while real, is also fragile. It could have been otherwise. It almost was. You return now, not as a soldier or a ghost, but as a quiet observer, moving like breath through time, through reeds and rivers and temple corridors. It's the 14th century, and Japan is changing again. You feel it in the way the wind no longer rushes quite so loudly through Hakata Bay. The storms are gone, but the story, oh, the story is only getting stronger. You find yourself at a festival, bright banners, children, in masks, drums echoing across rice fields. At first, it feels like any other seasonal celebration. Lanterns bob, rice cakes are passed around, monks chant softly in the distance. But then a small wooden boat is carried through the streets by costumed dancers. It's painted black with red sails and paper lightning bolts tied to the mast. Everyone cheers when it's finally tossed into the river and set alight. They don't call it reenactment. They don't need to. Everyone knows what it means. This is the annual burning of the Mongol ship, a ritual reminder that Japan survived not once but twice, thanks to the sea, the wind, and whatever invisible hands may have guided them. Children cheer, elders nod, and someone somewhere whispers a prayer they don't quite remember learning. You look closer at the paper lightning bolts. They've each got a name written on them. Names of ancestors, of warriors lost, of fishermen who drowned in storms. The lines between memory and myth have blurred so gently that no one notices anymore. Back in the centers of power, the Kamakura shogunate is now a ghost itself. By 1333, it's fallen, toppled by Emperor Go-Daigo's rebellion and the rise of the Ashikaga shogunate. The warrior class still rules, but differently now. The confidence of the past century, the feeling of divine favor, is being replaced with something else. Paranoia. Where the storm once protected, now the fear is internal. Betrayal. Division. Power slipping through fingers like seawater through a cracked hull. Historians still argue whether the ghost of the Mongol invasions haunted Japan's military structure. Did the endless fortification along the coast teach the wrong lessons? Did the shogunate's failure to reward loyalty plant the seeds of future civil war? Maybe, or maybe it just delayed what was always coming. But still the memory persists. In village shrines, wooden tablets called aema are left hanging under eaves, prayers and sketches etched in shaky hands. Some ask for health, others for marriage. A few scrawled in childish brushstrokes simply read, "Please protect Japan like you did before." You smile, because you remember when that protection was more than just story. You find yourself in a small coastal temple where a priest tends to a wind-blown garden. He's trimming plum blossoms and humming a tune so old it has no name. When you ask about the temple's history, he chuckles and points to a faded mural on the wall. It's a depiction of the sea battle waves curling like claw ships, breaking apart spirits hovering above. But the faces of the Mongols, they're not monstrous, they're serene, almost reverent, as if even the invaders in the end became part of the story, folded into the divine play actors who never knew the script. One quirky discovery somewhere along the Okinawan coast: later sailors will adopt the practice of typhoon ropes, twisting 5-colored cords and hanging them from masts for good luck. The practice, believed to stem from ancient kamikaze offerings, survives in some fishing villages even now. Colorful knots tied not for navigation but for protection from a wind that once favored one nation over another. You wonder, what did the sea think of all this? The typhoons, after all, weren't conjured by prayer or politics. They were just weather systems, impartial, powerful, unpredictable. And yet for Japan, they became something else entirely: confirmation. That you're meant to be here, that your island is protected, that the sea is your shield. And if you're a child growing up in 14th century Japan, those stories are as real as the rice you eat the sword. Your father sharpens the shrine where your mother leaves offerings. The Mongols are long gone, but their shadows are etched into every crashing wave. And for the descendants of those survivors, both Japanese and Mongol, the legacy lingers in quiet ways. A curved blade passed down through 5 generations said to have cut the rope on a burning ship. A rusted helmet kept in a lacquer box, never cleaned, never forgotten. A lullaby sung in a language no one speaks anymore about horses afraid of thunder. You drift now through those stories not as a witness, but as part of the tide, rising, falling, erasing footprints, but never memory. Because memory, like the wind, always returns. You're now drifting into the 20th century. The scent of gunpowder replaces incense. The noise of airplanes replaces the whistle of arrows. And the kamikaze, that old word for divine wind, has returned. But this time it carries a very different meaning. You're in Japan again, but it's not the Japan of wooden temples and painted scrolls. It's steel railways, industrial sprawl. The emperors wear military uniforms now. The nation that once feared invasion has become an invader. And somewhere deep in the corridors of its war machine, old stories stir. The word kamikaze is dusted off and handed to a new generation, not as myth but as mission. Historians still argue how deliberate the use of that name was, how self-aware the imperial government was in invoking a 600-year-old typhoon to name suicide pilots. But regardless of intention, the effect was electric. The divine wind was no longer a storm from the gods. It was now a man in a cockpit. It's 1944 and you're standing on an airfield in Kyushu, not far from where the Mongols once landed. Young men are lining up to die not for territory but for symbolism, for legend, for Japan. Their planes are light, fast, and packed with explosives. Their heads are shaved. Their letters home are full of solemn pride and barely concealed fear. They are told that they are the new kamikaze, that they, like the wind, will protect Japan from foreign invaders. But this time it doesn't work. The ships they crash into do not sink empires. The gods are silent. The wind does not blow in their favor. And when the war ends, the word kamikaze has changed forever. What once meant miraculous salvation now tastes like tragedy, like sacrifice misunderstood, like old myths repurposed for a modern war. You sit on a bench near Hakata Bay, not in 1281, but in 1981. Tourists walk by. Children chase pigeons. A plaque on the seawall tells the story of the Mongol invasions. It's brief, tidy, sanitized. It mentions the storm. It does not mention the suicides. You watch a ferry leave the harbor. It traces the same route once taken by invaders and defenders and fishermen and ghosts. The water sparkles now, clear blue, harmless. But you know better. The sea remembers, and the wind never forgets. One quirky note from the modern age: in the 1980s, Japanese school textbooks quietly adjusted their framing of the Mongol invasions. They stopped calling them a miracle. Instead, they used terms like natural weather events. Some parents protested. "Don't take the kami out of our kazi," they said. But time moves on. Today, the kamikaze storms are a footnote in global history. Mention them outside Japan and most will think only of World War II. The connection to the 13th century faded. Misunderstood. And yet, every few years a typhoon brushes the coast of Kyushu, rattling windows and tearing branches. And in its wake, someone, usually an older man with memories of a different era, will mutter, "The gods still haven't left us." You stand by the remains of the old wall at Hakata. The stones are moss-covered now. Tourists touch them without understanding. But you place your hand on the rock and feel it, not the stone, but the silence behind it. The centuries of fear, of prayer, of belief. This wall didn't stop an empire, but it tried. And perhaps that's enough. Because the real wall, as it turned out, was the sea. You walk the seabed now. No, not literally you haven't grown gills, but through time's lens you find yourself drifting gently beneath the surface of Hakata Bay. The world is muffled here, blue and slow, the light above rippling like a memory you can't quite name. And then out of the sand it appears a bronze helmet, its curve still smooth after 700 years. Beside it, a piece of timber blackened and cracked likely from the hull of a Yuan ship. A little farther along you see the corroded tines of an anchor and a tangle of arrowheads, their barbs dulled by centuries. This is the graveyard of the Mongol invasion, and in the early 2000s, Japanese archaeologists finally begin to uncover it piece by piece. You're back on the surface now watching divers suit up along the Takashima coastline. There's no fanfare, just quiet determination and a stack of laminated documents on folding tables. Every dive might reveal something new. A forgotten sword. A section of hull. A bone. In 2001, one such dive recovers a nearly intact Mongol ship, a rare thing. It's small, about 20 meters long, but still visibly structured. You can trace the ribs, the shape, the pitch-sealed seams. It looks more like a story than a boat. Historians still argue how much of the fleet lies beneath these waters. Some estimate thousands of wrecks. Others think the rest were dragged off by the tides. But no one doubts that the seabed here is heavy with history. And with questions. Because as they pull up more pieces, the archaeologists begin to notice things. The timbers on some ships are mismatched, nails driven at odd angles. Repairs made mid-voyage with whatever materials were available. In one case, they find an anchor made of stone cheap, rushed, desperate. It confirms what survivors like you already knew: the Second Fleet was built in haste. Quantity over quality, mass over durability. These weren't ships of conquest, they were ships of hope. And fear and inevitability. One quirky find, a lacquered box sealed watertight, recovered in 2014. Inside were coins, a carved jade ornament, and a sliver of paper with Yuan script. Faded but still legible. It was a personal offering, maybe to a family shrine. Maybe to a god. Maybe just for luck. A quiet pocket of human hope sent to sea, never returned. You move now through the museum halls that hold these relics, glass cases of corroded weapons, gently lit fragments of armor, annotated diagrams showing how the ships might have looked. A school group passes through, their teacher explaining in careful tones that this is where the foreign army broke upon Japan like waves upon rock. The students scribble notes. But one child stops, face pressed to the glass, and stares at the spearhead for a long time. Maybe he's wondering what it felt like to carry it. Maybe he sees himself in the soldier who dropped it. Maybe he just likes pointy things. Either way, the story has reached him. And you walking still emerge again into the air, the wind brushing your face. You're near the bay where the seawall once stood, and pieces of it still do. Mossy, humble, defiant. Locals come here to jog or fish or sit quietly on benches with convenient store tea. But for some it's more a place where the past is close enough and a feel. You overhear someone saying, if the wind hadn't come, we'd be speaking Mongolian today. It's meant as a joke. But you hear the undercurrent, an uneasy reverence even now. Because history didn't end with the storm, it just turned like a ship in a strong current. You close your eyes. You can still hear it, the drum beats on the ships, the creak of masts, the shouting of orders in 3 languages. You can hear the first arrow loose into the air, the first wave hitting the wall, the first clap of thunder that told you it's happening again. And then silence. Because that's what the sea does. It takes and then it hides. Until one day someone goes looking. And when they do, what they find isn't always treasure. Sometimes it's memory. You drift now not through time, not through battlefields or shipwrecks, but through the quiet space between what happened and what might have. The space where history softens, loses its sharpness, and slips into dream. Because what if the storm hadn't come? You're walking again this time on a very different Japan. The wall at Hakata Bay lies broken. The fleet landed in full. The Mongol cavalry spreads out across Kyushu like wildfire. Villages fall. Samurai resist, but their numbers dwindle. Honor doesn't shield against explosives. Ritual doesn't stop formations. And in this version of things, Kublai Khan's dream comes true. The banners of the Yuan flutter in Kyoto. The emperor becomes a figurehead in a dynasty governed from far away. Japan becomes another province in an already sprawling empire. Its language blended its temples, repurposed its swords, dulled beneath the boots of foreign governors. Would that Japan be richer or erased? Would Shinto survive? Would haiku exist? Would the samurai fade into footnotes? Historians still argue just how far Kublai intended to go. Was conquest the true goal or just submission? Was Japan meant to be another vassal like Goryeo Korea? Or was this something more an obsession? A hunger to test the very edge of empire? We'll never know, because the wind chose otherwise. You sit on the shoreline now, older, heavier with the weight of imagined timelines. A pine tree leans over your shoulder, creaking in the breeze. The tide moves like a breath in and out. And there across the water is everything that never happened. One quirky modern tale. In the town of Matsura, a fisherman swears that on certain foggy mornings when the waves are just right, you can hear faint drums coming from beneath the sea. Not the tide, not engines, drums. You think it's a story until you hear it yourself. Faint, rhythmic, sad. The sea holds its secrets well. In classrooms, children learn the facts. 1274, 1281. Yuan dynasty typhoons. They memorize dates, diagrams, generals. But later in festivals, they learn the stories. About how the gods sent the wind. About the land that could not be conquered. About a storm that arrived not by chance but by fate. And somewhere inside each telling is you. A soldier who didn't know how to sail. A survivor who crawled through the mud and into memory. A whisper inside a legend too big for any one name. Japan remembers not just what happened, but what didn't. And that's the strange magic of this story. It's not only a tale of wall ships and storms, but of possibility. Of how close history came to breaking one way and didn't. So now in this final breath of narration, you stand at the shoreline once more. The waves are gentle. The air is warm. You close your eyes, and you remember. Now let's slow things down, shall we? Let the crashing waves fall away. Let the echo of drums, the clash of steel, and the howling storm all melt into soft silence. The ships are gone. The wall has crumbled, and only the breeze remains moving through pine needles like a lullaby too old to name. You've wandered far tonight, through the halls of empires and the hearts of warriors, through temples built from memory and shorelines carved by time. You've watched mighty fleets rise and fall, and you've stood at the edge of what might have been. But now you can let that go, because here in the hush of this final moment, you're safe. The sea no longer stirs with warning. The sky is clear, the wind is just wind. And sleep. Sleep waits patiently beside you like a familiar friend. So take a slow breath. Let your body sink just a little deeper. There's no need to hold the story anymore. It's done its work. It's wrapped you in the soft armor of imagination. You've seen enough for one night. Tomorrow the waves will still whisper. The pine tree will still lean. The shore will still stretch out into a sea that holds everything and forgets nothing. But for now, let your eyes grow heavy. Let your mind float. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.